Look, Sheriff, you haul me in just to bug me with this kid. Well, you're wasting your time. I'm not gonna listen.
Fans loved him, but this is what Andy Griffith was really like. On November 22, 1963, Andy Griffith destroyed the entire Mayberry courthouse set. He threw chairs, smashed props, and punched walls. The cast stood frozen as America's favorite sheriff lost control. This wasn't about Kennedy's death. This was Andy showing his true face. The man who taught us about small-town values had affairs with his co-stars. He made grown men cry on set. His own adopted son died holding a letter, begging for forgiveness. The real Andy Griffith was nothing like Sheriff Taylor, and everyone in Hollywood knew it. Andy Griffith was born on June 1, 1926, in Mount Airy, North Carolina. His family was so poor, they couldn't even afford a crib. For the first few months of his life, baby Andy slept in dresser drawers. His parents lined them with cloth scraps, trying to make them soft. Their one-room house had barely any running water, and the cold crept in through gaps in the walls. It was a rough beginning that left deep scars. His mother, Geneva, blamed herself. She would cry while telling neighbors how ashamed she felt. Andy felt it too. That shame grew into something heavy. Even as a child, he feared poverty would come back. By age 5, he was already checking that doors were locked and food was stored. He needed control. He needed safety. And that fear turned into obsession. His father, Carl Lee Griffith, worked as a carpenter's helper. When there was work, he made about $8 a week. Often he worked only 3 or 4 days. He'd come home with splinters stuck in his hands, and Geneva would dig them out by candlelight. At night, Andy watched his father count coins by lamplight, hoping it would be enough for food and heating coal. Sometimes it wasn't. Their house stood on the wrong side of the railroad tracks. The neighborhood's reputation made Andy walk 2 extra miles to school so no one would see where he lived. That humiliation never left him. Later in life, he became obsessed with money, negotiating every contract down to the penny. Hollywood called him a miser, but he was just terrified of ending up back where he started. Geneva tried to keep him looking sharp. She scrubbed and ironed his few clothes, even his shoelaces, just to keep up appearances. But that backfired. Richer kids mocked him. They knew he was poor. They teased him for pretending to be better than he was. It got so bad that Andy developed a stutter that lasted until he was 14. So he started making people laugh. Jokes were his shield. He figured if he could get them to laugh, they wouldn't bully him. But inside, he was building walls. He began to believe that his value depended on performing, on being useful, entertaining, and safe. That belief followed him for the rest of his life. One of his first emotional outbursts happened at a school play. He was 8. He forgot his lines during a Christmas show and ran off stage. He locked himself in the coal cellar for 6 hours. When he came out, something had changed. His teacher said his eyes looked different, cold. His mother noticed it too. After that, Andy would go into dark moods, sometimes erupting in anger if he felt embarrassed or rejected. He once threw a rock at a boy who laughed at his pants. The boy needed 12 stitches. Those childhood storms never really went away. Decades later, on Hollywood sets, they came back. If he felt threatened or disrespected, he could explode, shouting, firing crew members, making grown men cry. People in the industry nicknamed him the Mount Airy Monster. But that angry kid also dreamed of becoming something bigger. As he grew up, Andy wanted to be an opera singer. Later, he thought about becoming a Moravian preacher. He enrolled in the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1944 to study theology. but music pulled at him harder. He switched to a music degree and graduated in 1949, the first in his family to finish college. At UNC, he starred in operettas and led the campus music fraternity. He performed in shows like The Mikado and HMS Pinafore. This training would shape his TV character years later. The quiet confidence of Sheriff Andy Taylor came from real musical discipline, and from the moral foundation his church life gave him. After college, Andy taught music at a high school in Goldsboro. For 3 years, he lived a double life. By day, he taught choir and drama. By night, he developed comedy routines with his wife Barbara. They performed at civic clubs around North Carolina. Slowly, his jokes and storytelling became sharper. One routine, in particular, started getting laughs every time. It was about a countryman who didn't understand football. He also spent summers performing in The Lost Colony, a historical outdoor play in Manteo. He started with small roles, but eventually played Sir Walter Raleigh. That role brought him steady work, growing confidence, and his first taste of real applause. He loved the Outer Banks so much that he eventually bought land there and asked to be buried there when the time came. Then, in 1953, he finally broke through. The routine he and Barbara had polished, what it was football, got recorded in a small Chapel Hill studio. At first, Andy froze up in front of the mic. It took 5 tries to get it right. But when they finally captured a clean version, it spread like wildfire. The record sold 50,000 copies in just a few weeks. Capitol Records picked it up, and it eventually sold nearly 800,000. It reached number 9 on the Billboard charts. That one moment changed everything. In early 1954, Andy appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, and suddenly the man who once slept in a dresser drawer had become a national name. Andy Griffith looked like the perfect American icon, a small-town guy with a warm smile and a kind heart, or so people thought. But behind the scenes, the truth was far more disturbing. His rise to fame in the 1950s came with a hidden cost, and the more successful he got, the darker his private life became. It all started in 1955. Griffith earned a Tony nomination for his role in No Time for Sergeants. The play opened at the Alvin Theater and ran for 796 performances. On the outside, it was a triumph, but inside, Griffith was already falling apart. Cast members later said he drank heavily, had violent mood swings, and ruled the set through fear. George Lindsay, who later worked with him on The Andy Griffith Show, said most of the cast was terrified of him. Griffith would only call actors he approved of after each performance. If the phone didn't ring, they dreaded the next day. This wasn't a one-time thing. It started early and never stopped. 2 years later, in 1957, Griffith made his film debut in A Face in the Crowd. He played a charming man who turns into a monster once he becomes famous. The role was eerily close to reality. Critics loved it, but what they didn't know was how close this character was to the real Andy Griffith. To get into the role, Griffith had chairs brought on set just so he could smash them. He needed to access real rage. That kind of anger didn't just come from nowhere, it lived inside him. And it didn't stay in the movies. Griffith's fame exploded after appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show and The Steve Allen Show. In 1956, he even shared the stage with Elvis Presley, who performed Hound Dog to a real basset hound. That episode drew 40 million viewers. Griffith was becoming a household name, but with that success came arrogance. People who worked with him noticed the change. He became rude, demanded special treatment, and looked down on others. His charm on camera masked a growing ego that was hard to hide in private. His marriage to Barbara Bray Edwards in 1949 began with love. They met at college and moved to New York together, but Hollywood changed him. Barbara stood by his side for 23 years, through thick and thin. They adopted 2 children together, but even her support couldn't stop his drinking or infidelity. Friends said the atmosphere at home was so tense, people avoided visiting. Griffith's public smile covered a private mess. Even before the Andy Griffith Show began in 1960, he was already cheating. His affair with actress Joanna Moore happened while he was still married to Barbara. Industry insiders knew. The public didn't. That wholesome image was already a lie. Griffith used his fame to attract women, all while pretending to be a loyal husband. His most famous affair, though, was with Annetta Corso, the actress who played Helen Crump. Corso joined the show in 1963. Andy fell hard. He proposed to her more than once while still married. She turned him down every time. But their affair didn't stop. It became an open secret. Everyone on set knew, even though they tried to hide it. One day, the crew sent a fake waiter to deliver dinner to their hotel room as a prank. What he walked in on left no doubt about what was going on. Griffith was furious, but the damage was done. The affair became impossible to ignore. To protect his image, Griffith took extreme measures. He would cut romantic scenes between Andy Taylor and Helen Crump. He didn't want the public connecting the dots. During one scene in 1964, when he was supposed to kiss Helen outside the office, he stopped the rehearsal and suggested they only make love with their eyes. He told the director it was more wholesome, but the truth was he was hiding the affair from viewers, sponsors, and the press. Behind closed doors, his temper was explosive. During season 2 of The Andy Griffith Show, he went into a rage and tore up the set. He smashed props, slammed cabinets, and punched walls. Don Knotts often stayed late just to calm him down. The cast walked on eggshells. Everyone knew that the sheriff of Mayberry could turn into a monster without warning. His behavior only worsened. Griffith later admitted that Sheriff Andy Taylor was who he wished he could be, but wasn't. In 1964, he told the Saturday Evening Post that he got awful easy. He avoided Hollywood parties because he was afraid he couldn't cope. He described himself as nervous and insecure, not calm and wise like his character. The gap between the man and the myth was growing. CBS executives knew they had a problem. The show's image was everything. It was about small-town values, honesty, and family. If the public found out the truth, the whole empire could collapse. So the network launched a cover-up. Interviews were controlled. Set access was restricted. Cast members were told to stay silent. Sponsors threatened to pull millions in ads if a scandal broke. Everyone had too much to lose. Despite all this, Griffith continued to cheat. His affair with Joanna Moore wasn't the last. It wasn't even the worst. Moore only appeared in 4 episodes of the show. She left soon after the affair, and insiders said it was no coincidence. Years later, she had only kind things to say, but her departure was quiet and fast. The affair with Corso lasted years. Even after Griffith divorced Barbara in 1972, he never married Annetta. She said no every time, but she kept appearing in his later shows, like Matlock and the 1993 reunion special. Their connection never fully ended. It wasn't just an affair, it was love. But it came at a price. Frances Bavier never felt truly seen. While the world laughed at the antics of Andy Griffith and Don Knotts, she sat quietly in the background, resentful, frustrated, and bitter. She once said, "I've had to take a back seat and watch others get the laughs." And that feeling never left her. For all 8 seasons of The Andy Griffith Show, she watched as Aunt Bee was reduced to the straight character, the one who held the pie while the men delivered the punchlines. Bavier had trained professionally. She had bigger dreams than being a sweet aunt in a small southern town. Yet every week, she stood in the shadows, while Andy and Don took center stage and won the crowd. She spoke to the press about it. She didn't hide her resentment. Everyone on set felt it. The tension built up so much that Frances started therapy. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was pain, a kind that cut deep and stayed there. One of the biggest triggers? Andy Griffith's love of practical jokes. He thought it was fun. She thought it was humiliating. He liked to laugh and mess around between takes. She wanted focus and professionalism. The result was daily conflict. Andy joked. Frances withdrew. She wasn't part of the fun. And the more she pulled away, the more isolated she became. That distance hurt her deeply, but it also became her shield. The divide was clearest with Don Knotts. Frances later admitted she spoke less than 5 words to him during the entire 8 years they worked together. They shared scenes, they stood side by side, but off camera, there was silence. Not hatred, just distance. She respected him as an actor. She even thought he had charm, comparing him to Fred Astaire. He wore trench coats with the collar up and always had a girl on his arm. She noticed all of that, but she never said much. She just worked around him, kept to herself, and stayed distant. Jim Nabors saw the pain. He was one of the few people Frances trusted. When Andy Griffith muttered something unkind about her after a table read, Nabors didn't let it slide. He turned to Andy and said softly, "Andy, she's a good actress. You be nice to her." Andy had nothing to say in return. That quiet moment revealed everything. The cast had taken sides. Frances was alone, except for Jim. And when he spoke up, it was more than kindness. It was protection. Years later, that pain still hadn't gone away. In the mid-1980s, Andy Griffith and Ron Howard showed up unannounced at Frances Bavier's house in North Carolina. They wanted to say hello. Maybe reconnect. Maybe make peace. But when she opened the door and saw them, she refused to let them in. She didn't want a reunion. She didn't want closure. She slammed the door. That moment said more than any words could. She had turned her back on all of it. Not just the show, but the people. The grudges had never faded, and when she was offered one final call with Andy just 4 months before her death, she apologized. "I'm sorry we didn't get along better. It was my fault. I just wish we had." That was the only time she ever admitted regret. But resentment wasn't just on Frances's side. Andy Griffith had demons of his own. Don Knotts won 5 Emmys for his role as Barney Fife. Andy, the star of the show, was never even nominated. Not once. The contrast haunted him. He never brought it up with Don. Not once. Not even a congrats. The silence was heavy. According to Don's family, Andy just couldn't talk about it. It cut too deep. That pain came out in dark, disturbing ways. Andy once had a dream that he murdered Don Knotts. He woke up shaking, drenched in guilt. He couldn't find Don. He panicked. He called his therapist. He said he was killing the character, not the man. But the dream spoke for itself. Somewhere deep inside, jealousy had turned into rage. It lived there quietly for years. In 1983, Andy's life took another brutal turn. Just after marrying Cindy Knight, he came down with what felt like the flu. But it wasn't. It was Guillain-Barré syndrome. The pain was unbearable. It took away his ability to walk. For 7 months, he was paralyzed. He described it as searing pain that never stopped. He collapsed one day while watching the Kentucky Derby. Doctors couldn't help him. He wore braces on his legs. They squeaked so loudly, Soundmen could hear them during filming. He had to take them off. The illness aged him. It crushed his spirit, and it only made his temper worse. But that wasn't all. Behind the charming sheriff of Mayberry was a man struggling with alcohol. When Andy drank, he became someone else, mean, cruel, and unpredictable. Cast members feared him. George Lindsay, who played Goober, said everyone dreaded Monday nights. Andy would call if he liked your performance. If he didn't call, you knew Tuesday was going to be hell. His drinking created tension everywhere. He could be warm and generous one moment and explosive the next. And nothing showed that side more than what happened on November 22, 1963. When President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, Andy lost control. He destroyed the courthouse set in a fit of grief and rage. Props were thrown. Furniture overturned. No one stopped him. They all stood back. Only Don Knotts stepped in. He walked up to Andy, put a hand on his shoulder, and calmed him down. That day wasn't about politics. It was about a man pushed to his breaking point. Sam Griffith was just an infant when Andy Griffith adopted him in 1957. His sister Dixie followed in 1959. From the outside, it looked like the perfect family. But things started to fall apart when Andy and his wife divorced in 1972. Sam was 15, and the split hit him hard. He began to act out, drink, and fall into trouble. Being the adopted son of America's favorite TV dad made everything worse. Sam never felt like he fit in. He believed his father loved his TV son Opie more than him. He called himself the black sheep of the family. As Sam grew older, the problems grew worse. His drinking led to drugs, arrests, and long stretches of chaos. Andy tried to help. He once spent $15,000 on rehab for Sam, but nothing worked. Sam couldn't escape the spiral. In 1996, everything came to an end. Sam was just 38 when his roommate found him dead in their North Hollywood apartment. Liver failure and cirrhosis took him. He had drunk himself to death. In his hand was a letter he'd written to his father, begging for one more chance. Andy never saw it. The letter never made it out of the room. They hadn't spoken in years. Andy had cut Sam off emotionally after a domestic abuse conviction. He couldn't even bring himself to attend the funeral. Dixie went alone. She later said her father was deeply broken by it. He was never the same, she said. Andy had already been through 2 divorces. His first marriage to Barbara Bray Edwards lasted 23 years. They'd made a deal early on. Whoever made it big would chase the career. Andy did. Barbara stepped back. They adopted Sam and Dixie together, but the marriage couldn't survive. They divorced in 1972. In 1973, Andy married a Greek actress, Solika Kasuto. That one lasted 8 years. Then came Cindy Knight. Andy met her while filming a TV movie. She was 27. He was 56. They married in 1983 and stayed together until Andy's death nearly 30 years later. Dixie mostly stayed out of the spotlight. She spoke rarely about the family, but offered a glimpse now and then. She said the fame changed everything. Summers in North Carolina felt normal, but Hollywood didn't. She watched her brother fall apart. She said it wasn't Andy's fault, but it still hit him hard. She remembered her father as someone who tried to protect the family, even from his own pain. In a strange twist, Andy once played an alcoholic father in a 1986 TV movie called Under the Influence. His character was cruel and angry, destroying his family through drinking. The performance was raw, even disturbing. It was released just 10 years before Sam died from alcoholism. Viewers didn't know how close that role was to real life. Andy, in a way, had lived it already. That same year, Matlock premiered. It became Andy's biggest hit after The Andy Griffith Show. running from 1986 to 1995 with 193 episodes. Andy was 60 when it started. He played Ben Matlock, a brilliant but grumpy lawyer who charged $100,000 per case. That's about $240,000 today. Andy loved the role. He once said it was his favorite, even more than Sheriff Taylor. But behind the scenes, he was in constant pain. Guillain-Barré syndrome had nearly paralyzed him in 1983. He spent 7 months in rehab and returned to work still hurting. Filming was torture. Pain shot through his body daily, but he never let it show. He also clashed with co-workers. Matlock had a high cast turnover. Griffith could be difficult. He even got upset over people eating his peanut butter on set. He pushed for darker storylines, including alcohol abuse and violence, but producers refused. He'd carried grudges since his early days in showbiz. He rewarded loyalty, but never forgot betrayal. As he aged, health issues kept piling up. He had a heart attack in 2000 and needed quadruple bypass surgery. His feet still hurt from the Guillain-Barré syndrome. By the early 2000s, he knew his time was limited. In 2002, he returned to his hometown of Mount Airy. He told the crowd he wouldn't be a stranger anymore. But for some, it was too little, too late. He'd ignored old friends for decades, even refusing to meet them backstage when they visited him in New York back in the 50s. In 1997, he surprised everyone by winning a Grammy for a gospel album. I love to tell the story. He didn't even go to the ceremony. He thought he had no chance. The album went platinum. It was a return to his roots and his faith. It looked like a quiet attempt at peace. But those who knew him said he still hadn't changed much. On July 3, 2012, Andy Griffith died of a heart attack at age 86. He passed at home on Roanoke Island in North Carolina. He'd suffered for 24 hours before dying. The burial happened just 5 hours later. Private, fast, quiet. Just like he wanted. But even after death, secrets kept coming. One of the biggest was about Aunt Bee. Frances Bavier, who played her, had hated Andy during the show's run. She thought he was childish. He thought she was cold. They barely spoke. In 1986, she wouldn't even let him into her house when he came to visit. But before she died in 1989, she called him to apologize. She said, "I'm sorry we didn't get along better. It was my fault." It was the end of a feud no one even knew existed. Meanwhile, Andy's hometown kept pretending it was Mayberry. Mount Airy makes $5 million a year off Mayberry Days, a festival based on a lie. Andy always denied the town inspired the show. But people kept coming. Shops and tours sell nostalgia that never really existed. Black residents, who make up 8% of the population, are nowhere in that version of history. It's a whitewashed memory built for tourists looking to escape reality. In 2005, Andy Griffith received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He stood alongside Muhammad Ali and Aretha Franklin. President George W. Bush praised him as a national treasure. But the honor celebrated a character more than the man. Griffith once admitted, "I wish I could be like Andy Taylor. He's nicer than I am."